Hello and welcome back to Akamai TV. I'm Paul Jackson from Akamai, and we're going to take the next 20-30 minutes or so to talk around some of the obligations, the universal obligations that European broadcasters are under, and how that both acts as a safety net in terms of citizens being able to get content, but also is somewhat of an imposition and a challenge for them in terms of what they're allowed to do or where they could potentially go. Joining me is Alexander Leschinsky from G&L. Welcome, Alexander. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this certainly my American colleagues don't really understand this idea of what the broadcasters have to do and what they're not allowed to do. It's much more of a free market in the States. So why don't we kick off with some of that? What are these constraints that many broadcasters are under, and where did those come from?
Okay, yeah. I can especially talk about the public broadcasters in Germany. So until the late 1980s, we only had public broadcasters in Germany, and only then the market was regulated in a way that allowed for commercial broadcasters to come up. So their whole history started after World War II, when the BBC was asked to provide a former director to impose the BBC system onto the newly found Germany in a more federal way. So we have like 16 mini BBCs that are working both on regional areas and both on national broadcasts. And so their foundation came with a certain set of regulations that first required them to produce their content for everybody in Germany, so it was not meant to be restrictive in any way. It was meant to be financed by everybody, so that they have some freedom from actually viewer numbers, so that they can produce content that they assume is relevant to the public. And it required them to be available on all the mass communication means that are there. So at that time, of course, it was just terrestrial radio and TV, but later on it grew into DVB-T, cable, satellite, and in the end, OTT. So that was where it all started with.
I think these, whilst to be applauded in terms of that universal access, there are certain things that this also stops those public broadcasters from doing, isn't there? Like raising additional money, for instance.
It's exactly. So one of the key problems that they have is that the way they are financed is that each household in Germany has to pay a fee for them, and you can't opt out. It's a mandatory requirement. And this enables them, they have a fixed number of subscribers, which is the number of households in Germany, so they can't increase their number of subscribers by anything they do. They have maxed out their subscriber base. At the same time, for good reasons, they are not allowed to advertise on the web. So in turn for this financial system that they benefit from or that they are built upon, they may not use ads to increase their revenue on the web. So they can do this in TV with very strict regulations, but not on the web. So there are no advertisement banners on their websites. There are no ads in the video itself. Nothing that is not seen on linear TV. Right. So that means that the problem is that more users in the OTT space with IP delivery only increases their cost. So it does not give them any more revenue or something like that. So that's a crucial point. And at the same time, it's difficult for them to get an incentive for quality, because if their subscriber base is fixed, no more revenue by more users. So where is the incentive to provide quality? So there is no legal requirement for a certain level of quality, or a certain resolution in TV, a certain buffering ratio like that is. We know that for BBC, for instance, there were some discussions around legally requiring a certain maximum of buffering that would be acceptable. I don't know if this is in place in the UK, but we don't have something like that in Germany at all. So it's difficult for them to balance the requirements that they have for the universal access to everything they produce, and at the same time find the right quality to compete with the ever-growing private networks or the big OTT platforms like Netflix, which are starting to set the expectation for quality that our customers see.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, if you look at when these regulations sort of originated, there wasn't the concept that a brand new player could enter the market, set up a wholly different network, and start charging subscription to people. You know, you were limited to that sort of that aerial broadcast or cable or satellite. So you're now getting these extremely aggressive, sometimes local, often international players coming into the market with 4K or with subscription packages, and yet the public broadcasters are still expected to
correct
sit back almost.
Yeah, correct. And so that is an issue for them. On the other side, moving to these new technologies to improve quality comes at a very high cost for their traditional broadcast. So for instance, moving to 4K, HDR, 60, 50 frames per second for satellite distribution is a huge investment and is only making sense if they have a huge portion of their content already available or produced in that sense. However, with IP delivery, we see that they have more flexibilities in trying out things. So the first 4K, the first 50 frames per second or more high frame rate setups that we see, or the first HDR setups that we see, only come with the OTT space for them. So that is where they experiment, that is where they try out things, that is where VR and so comes into play. So it gives them a certain set of flexibility. On the other hand, their biggest challenge with that is the economy of scale and the increasing cost. So how to get...
I think I think we'll let's dig deeper into that idea of, obviously, the two sides we discussed before was, so if you've got a fixed income, to stay competitive, you've either got to reduce your costs, or you've got to make the process of creation more efficient, or distribution more efficient. So that idea of using IP rather than the traditional broadcast networks, obviously, fires in that way. So what are you seeing, or what are you helping the broadcasters do in terms of that innovation, efficiency, integration?
Yeah, so one way to do there are several ways to try to lower your costs and still operate at a certain quality. And some are taking place in the delivery part. So which CDNs do you select? What technology are you using there? Are you enhancing your delivery by something like peer-assisted delivery, something like that? But another important area is the usage of the actual video and audio codecs that you're using. So to our understanding and what we see in the business is in the market is actually that if you look at the modern codecs, so like HEVC and VP9 and on the horizon AV1, there is a huge potential for bandwidth savings, and that is something that I think is the best way to lower your costs generally. However, you have to find a very good balance, because encoding in these very efficient codecs is expensive, because it takes much more resources than encoding in AVC, for instance. So that means that this comes at a certain cost, and it depends on the size of your library. So how much content do you have, how much content do you produce, and how much of that is actually used. So you have a big matrix in your mind. This is the content that I have, this is the usage that I have. So some are more popular than others, of course. And our public broadcasters, out of that obligation to produce content universally for down to very regional themes and topics, have a very large long tail. And for that large long tail, it might not be efficient to produce all the various expensive codec versions. But for the highest profile, the mostly used content, like the big drama shows, the big news shows, everything that is above a certain usage level, I think it makes absolutely sense to produce that in the plethora of modern codecs that we have, and then deliver at the perfect codec for the given device. And that gives another set of complexity in it, but it makes sense for that portion, the top 10%, to give a figure.
And you can imagine that graph in their minds of, here's the extra cost of the codec versus how many people we'd need to use that to save the bandwidth.
Exactly. So that is one thing, and I can talk also about the difficulties that you then get with detecting which device supports which codec. That brings another level of complexity, where you have to make sure that you have a very conservative approach to that, so that you don't target a device with a codec that it does not understand. So that gives another layer that you did not have to think about before that. Another thing that we think is very interesting to our customers is that currently they have spent a lot of time and effort into defining the exact bit rates that they encode to. So they are all using ABR. They have multiple bit rates. Some have 4, some have 6, some have 10. And they have, so the public broadcasters in Germany, Austria and Switzerland, they have founded a research institute which resides in Munich, the IRT, the Institut für Rundfunktechnik. And they define a lot of standards for them, and include among that is the standard for what bit rates they transcode into.
Right.
So as they are a very heterogeneous group, this is part of the effort to unify what they are doing, and that is a good approach. That makes sense, of course, to them. However, what we see is that not all content is equal, and not all content is to be encoded equal. And we see that if you look at the new trends like per title encoding or per scene encoding, where you take into consideration what is the actual content I'm transcoding here. What is happening in this specific episode or in this specific scene, then you see there are scenes with no much movement, low light, not much contrast. So this is always an opportunity to deliver the same quality with much lower bandwidth.
Right.
So you can, we've actually here at the IBC, we've talked with multiple vendors about that, who provide solutions that individually look at each piece of content that you transcode into the scene, down to the scene level, and then derive the perfect set of bit rates for that content.
Right.
So perhaps approaching all content with the same bit rate ladder is not ideal, but rather let the content determine what the perfect bit rate set is. And this again can save you at least 2 figures percentage, like 10+% onwards. So that is substantial. That is substantial. No? But it forces you to think this around and derive from what you have achieved so far. No?
And I'm assuming many of those solutions use some kind of AI for automatically going through the content to determine.
Some don't, but many do.
Okay. That will be the bottleneck. Otherwise, is
correct.
Somebody having to go, well, this scene is badly lit, and I think it needs a 7 on the scale of 7 to 10. It's just not scalable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course they can't jump on every wagon, and they have some constraints because they have not always the complete control from the encoder to the delivery to the player, because they often syndicate content or they produce content within one broadcaster, but they publish on a Mediathek, which is a media library that is managed by one of the others.
Right.
So they have to comply to certain standards. They might produce the content, they might pay for the delivery themselves, but they do not control the exact player. So there are some boundaries in which they can act. No?
Right.
So if you control the encoder, delivery, and the player, you have much more flexibility in really optimizing on top of that.
Now talk to me about peer-assisted delivery. That was one of the things you mentioned that they could use, but I understand they're reticent to do so, more so than commercial broadcasters. Tell me a little about why they're holding back on that.
Okay, so there are mainly 2 reasons for that we see when we discuss it with them. So the first one is with the late GDPR coming into effectiveness, they have strong doubts if peer-assisted streaming is compatible with GDPR at all. And the reason
at all, hadn't thought of that.
At all. And the reason for this is that once you have a peer-assisted delivery, one peer sees another peer, not directly, not in the browser. It's not popping up and says a clear text name,
David
something like that.
Street
but if you take the means and tools that are available on every operating system, you open a console and you type netstat. And then you see the open connections that you have. So this is no hack. This requires only basic knowledge of what is going on. You immediately see a list of IP addresses that communicate with your device. And the IP address is has been declared a personal identifiable piece of information. So it is covered by GDPR. So if the broadcasters would use peer-assisted delivery, their users would see IP addresses of other users, but the broadcasters could not control what they do with this knowledge. Do they publish it? Do they contact the other one? Do they store it? So they don't have any control at all what happens with these IP addresses.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
For the normal delivery, for instance, Akamai gathers the log files and knows exactly what they do with this, and so the client the customer can know what is going on and can control it. But with period-assisted delivery, this is not possible. And that is a crucial point. And with everything GDPR, that we have to wait until the court sort this out. But so far, there is a certain risk, and this makes my clients shy away from it. Edgy. Yeah, that's the right word. So that is one thing. The other thing is more political. So as every household has to pay for these services, independent if they have a TV set or a radio set, just because they may have a computer with which they may use this service. Right. This is has a lot of supporters, and I'm sure that the majority of the German public is very much in favor of this system. However, there are some people who hate this, and those look for all the details where they say, okay, I'm forced into paying this service here, and I don't want to. And now they are also trying to tax me twice in using my upstream bandwidth. And there are lots of ways to discuss this and to different perspectives on that. And independently if this answer or question is right or wrong, our broadcasting customers don't want to get into this discussion at all. Because they can be heard a lot, so that is difficult for them to come up with. So, and those two make it very difficult to look into this at all. As
you say, you can see the GDPR issue becoming clearer over the next year, 18 months potentially, but that issue of double taxation or you're using my infrastructure that the critics of the license would make, that's probably not going to go away.
I don't think so, and I'm not regarding it as a tax because I support the system and I see the benefits of it. So don't get me wrong, of course, but there are some voices who regard it in that aspect, and that why risk that until you have used all other means to reduce your cost base. That's the main story behind that.
It's the UK is the same. You know this. It is regarded as a tax by a certain number of people in the UK. Probably more vociferous opponents than in Germany, to be honest. And they would have the same reaction. If you had a broadband account that had a capped upload, and you were using that for retransmitting, they would hate that.
And we also discussed, okay, so why not use this only for premium content? So for instance, you could say, okay, I'm trying to use your upstream bandwidth, so you want something for that. So why not make an opt-in and say the highest quality, the 4K stream, you only get, we can only afford with the public money that we're on, if you let us use your upstream bandwidth. So that could be something. However, this comes across with their obligation to treat all users equally. So they can just give them a better quality in exchange for something. That is not the way they operate and work. That's not their basis. So that's not a way to go there.
The BBC had an analogous position sort of a few years ago, whereby they couldn't launch on Xbox, for instance, because they would have to launch within their Microsoft subscription service. So it wasn't free to all, even if you had an Xbox, which the PlayStation 1 was. So it wasn't. It broke the wording of that universal obligation.
I understand.
Those are always going to be thorny, I think. Switching gear slightly, tell me about the open source live encoding project. That was something we were talking about. I thought was really interesting.
So the short story is we as G&L, we have developed our own video and audio encoder for quite some time. But then we saw that as a niche player in the encoding market, we can compete with the big ones, with the elementals and harmonics and whatever of the world. So we rather decided to switch our assessment there and work in a way as we work with other products. And that means that we try to find a mix of 3 to 5 vendors that we work with for a certain step of the signal chain, and then provide our customers with a certain choice. And usually this is a mixture, if we can, of open source solutions and hardware solutions. So for instance, for the audio encoder, we just announced that we cooperate with the well-known audio broadcast company Qubit. So they will enhance their encoders based on input that we give them on the OTT space. So that is a cooperation, so we resell that hardware. On the other side, we work together a lot with elemental technologies for hardware encoders. But we are not restricted to that, so we always have to look what is the right solution for the right customer. And now, a very popular solution, of course, for live transcoding is FFmpeg, which is the most popular open source video encoder, which is very flexible and has a lot of configuration options that there are. However, in the past, it was not qualified to ingest into Akamai network for certain protocols. So there were some restrictions there. So what we did now is we work with the Akamai team, we work with the FFmpeg team, we work with experts within Akamai like Will Law to make this happen, to be able to use FFmpeg where it makes sense as an alternative to commercial encoders, and still be able to deliver into our beloved Akamai CDN. And that is a very interesting thing, because it allows us to provide customers with yet another very flexible and low-cost solution there. It's not fully fledged and compared to one of the bigger commercial encoders, and usually within the broadcast area, we are happy to work with the traditional broadcast equipment companies that make sense there. But we have smaller customers, event-based customers who just simply can't afford this kind of machine, and they are happy with having an open source software that we then can deploy in a very flexible way on cloud services within Docker, and still push to Akamai. That's a very nice combination that we have there. So
that sounds really interesting in terms of, certainly from our perspective, being able to get that content into our networks, and offering that flexibility above and beyond, as you say, the sort of the expensive industry strength type of encoding solutions.
That's a nice combination, and so the loop closes in the player side. So for instance, there we also work with player teams like Bitmovin and TheoPlayer. We also work with JW Player, but we also have a deep integration and work with a team that produces HLS.js, which is an open source player component. So we have the same choice between commercial and open source solutions, both at the beginning of the signal chain and in the end, and that makes it very flexible to come up with solutions and to react, because we see, and you see it here at the IBC, everything is evolving so extremely quickly, and you can do things in a myriad of ways, and so we always need to stay agile and react on what customers come up with.
Well, talking about IBC, last question. What have you seen here since the show started that's really tweaked your interest?
Okay, so I've seen a lot of things here, but there are, I think, 2 things that I keep in mind all the time. And that is, so we have a department that is specialized in live event streaming, so they go out and for press conferences, something like these trade shows here, and they feel a strong urge to make everything more compact and more economically feasible. So they look into using just a set of iPhones for a real good production. Because if you look at iPhones, the camera lens is very good.
It's good enough now.
The quality is good. The encoder on board is very good. So why not use those devices for something where you don't see in the result that it has been produced by iPhones? There are some feature films right now by Steven Soderbergh that are based on iPhones only. So why not use that? And there are some really good developments that we've seen here at the IBC, so that you can do a live production with just a few handhelds. That's very good. And personally, the funniest experience that I had is, I don't know if you know VLC, the media player, and its icon is a traffic cone.
I know where you're going
Yeah,
with this.
okay. So I saw their mascot, and I made a selfie with the VLC mascot, and that was my personal highlight here.
There's also, I've seen like a dozen people wandering around with a hat version
exactly,
of that as well.
yeah, like a gardener with a strong beard. And so,
I love those guys.
I love this. Yeah.
Alexander, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
This is the end of our scheduled interviews to today. We have our house band, The Look, coming up on the hour with
Looking
beers,
forward to it.
which will mean nothing to anybody who's not actually in the centre, but to those at IBC, we have beers and the band at 5.
Yeah, great.
Alexander, thanks very much.
Thanks again, and have a good show.
You too.
See you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.